I've sort of taken a little bit of a similar stance in other ways, like gone against the grain of the traditional, maybe ketogenic mindset that's been talked about for the last at least 4 or 5 years as it gained popularity. And you just did a video a couple of days ago as of us recording this. Just quickly, like, what is your stance now towards the ketogenic diet? And I say that in air quotes because I know that you're not anti-ketogenic state, but there might be some problems with the ketogenic diet per se.
A ketogenic diet or a state of ketosis for humans has benefits in intractable epilepsy. And I was quite interested to see that when you drink a ketone ester, a ketone salt, or in diabetics who go into ketosis nutritionally, ghrelin is lowered. So you see this hunger hormone go down. And I find that really interesting because I think that for anyone to lose weight sustainably, which is probably the single greatest problem facing our American westernized population, is obesity. For anyone to lose weight sustainably, and that will result in so many health improvements, the appetite must be controlled. There are so many diets out there, quote unquote diets, that do not control hunger. And this is my huge beef, quote unquote, with them. I'm sorry for the bad pun. It was unintentional. This is my objection to those diets. So if it fits your macros, counting calories, calorie restriction, these are akin to a calorie restricted prison or imprisonment, in my opinion. And the human brain and the human body has hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, if you include pre-hominid evolution, that is urging us to break out of that calorie-restricted prison. So we must control hunger and be satiated in a way of eating if we are going to lose weight sustainably. So you can lose weight counting calories and calorie restricting, but it crushes your hormones and you end up with lots of problems long-term. So I like that a ketogenic state in humans achieved via nutritional ketosis does that. But I take it a step further and I think, okay, is it the absence of ketones that is causing most of the population to be hungry? And I don't think it is. I think it's problems with seed oils messing with our cannabinoid receptors in our hypothalamus and our brain. And so this is something I would love to debate obesity pundits and people that think about this. I would love to debate them on this because there's lots of theories about what causes us to get fat. But if you really look at the research, seed oils, things like corn, canola, safflower, sunflower, soybean, grapeseed, they have this fatty acid, right? This is an 18-carbon omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid. I'm sure your audience is familiar with linoleic acid. When you give linoleic acid to animals, you see 2 cannabinoids. You see anandamide and 2-AG increase in the brains of those animals, and that leads to hunger, okay? Because those cannabinoids are going to bind to the CB1, the cannabinoid 1 receptor in the brain. And that makes us hungry. Anyone that's ever smoked marijuana or taken an edible knows that if you put exogenous cannabinoids in your body, you are going to be hungry. Conversely, and I talked about this with Tucker Goodrich on my podcast, when you give humans, this has been done in Europe, this drug was never approved in the United States, a drug called rimonabant. It's an inverse agonist at the CB1 receptor, which means it technically binds to it, but it blocks it. So it blocks that CB1 receptor. So you can give them this rimonabant and it helps with hunger. So it really helps them lose weight. This would be a miracle drug for diabetes if it didn't cause people to commit suicide more, because it turns out we need cannabinoid receptor signaling in the brain to have a euthymic mood. So, but the mechanism is interesting. If you block cannabinoid receptors, people become less hungry. If you activate cannabinoid receptors, they become more hungry. So my suspicion is that the major driver of satiety disorders in the United States, leading people to overeat, is junk food. Is junk food, which contains these seed oils, which are, people don't even know it, but they're just tickling these cannabinoid receptors all the time in their brain. And they never really feel quite full, probably because their diet is also nutrient poor. So when it comes, this is a long-winded answer to your question. So when it comes to a ketogenic diet, that's one of the things that I think we need to consider, that there are better ways, in my opinion, to address the hunger. And I think if you cut out seed oils and you cut out processed sugars from your diet, you can eat a diet like meat, organs with fruit, and even honey, like I do, and not be hungry. A lot of your listeners might not believe me, but it's true. It's absolutely true. They need to try it. And then if you go further down the rabbit hole, we can talk about it. I have concerns about the absence of carbohydrates in the human diet. And so one of the cool things for me to learn over the last few years, as I transitioned from a strict carnivore diet of just meat and organs and fat to an animal-based diet, is what I've termed it, with fruit and honey, some carbohydrates, is that these carbohydrates appear to have some beneficial roles in the human body. I'm sure you're aware of this, right? So postprandial insulin signaling gets a really bad rap in a lot of keto communities, but it's so good for us. We need it at the level of the kidneys to hang on to sodium and potassium and other electrolytes. We need it to signal to the liver to make enough glutathione, this master antioxidant in the human body. We know that insulin signaling increases glutathione. This has been shown in ICU patients. We know that we need insulin at some level to keep sex hormone binding globulin down, so we have free hormones, especially testosterone for men. We know that we need some insulin signaling for our thyroid hormones to be normal. And we know that in athletes, if you give them some carbohydrates, their recovery post-exercise is better in terms of the free testosterone to cortisol ratio and in terms of immune function. So it was interesting for me because I went down this carnivore rabbit hole and had a lot of benefits on a ketogenic, a zero carb, quote unquote, carnivore diet in terms of my eczema. But then I ran into problems and had to keep doing research. And I found all these other things saying, wow, carbohydrates probably have some benefits for humans too. So I'm curious, what you think of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you probably saw the video I did about 3 or 4 months ago that said I'm quitting keto, although it wasn't entirely quitting keto. It was very similar to how you phrase it, right? I mean, let's be frank here, and sometimes you got to get a click. But at the end of the day, what I had learned is that balance is the wrong word. But I found that, okay, I've been fairly strict ketogenic when I first lost all my weight for like 3 years, like strict. And then I kind of started dabbling more into some carb cycling, with the lion's share of the time being ketogenic. And my carbs almost always were coming from fruit. I've always just been that way. I've never been a big grain guy. And I candidly don't even have a lot to say on it, other than the fact that I just don't feel great when I eat them, right? So for me, it's always been a fruit thing. And so for me, I started realizing, okay, there is some benefit here, and it's not to the degree that you've been looking at. And I find that very fascinating, because obviously insulin is required. We wouldn't have it if it wasn't required. And this demonization of insulin is going to be a problem. And right now I'm noticing, as far as content is concerned, almost a sick obsession with blood glucose. It's just, and I get it. People are interested in it. And that's great. They should be, to a certain degree, but these obsessions are going to take us too far. Because other things we have to look at: overeating in general, okay? Whether it's a saturated fat, a polyunsaturated fat, a fruit, a sugar, overeating in general is the problem, and it's like, no matter how you get there, that is where we start running. You start looking at hepatic triglycerides. We can point our fingers at different micronutrients. We can point our fingers at different macronutrients, but overeating is the problem, okay? And when I start looking at a ketogenic diet, for me, I still balance my ketogenic state on and off. But for me, a ketogenic state is treated as it should be for me, which is a hormetic stressor. I do it and I look at the train low studies, the sleep low studies, and that's how I look at my ketogenic diet. And I look at it in the sense of, okay, if I want to train in a very deprived state, I can put myself in a caloric box and put myself in this extreme deficit, or I can get a similar hormetic stressor by putting myself deep into a ketogenic state, training at high intensities. And then, interestingly enough, when I do introduce carbohydrates or fruit back into the picture more aggressively, I actually feel like I'm getting dual benefit, like I'm almost getting that metabolic flexibility that I want. So when I released that video, people were expecting me to be like, oh, I'm doing a complete 180 on the ketogenic diet. No, I still think the presence of ketones, histone deacetylase inhibition, all of that is a phenomenal thing that humans and pretty much all mammals could benefit from. And we're designed to have periods of time where we're in there. We're also designed to have periods of time when we're not. And I think it was hard for people to hear me say that, right? Because I had so much success with the ketogenic diet, but I'm impressed to see how much you've grown and willing to admit, not even say admit, because you were never admitting you're wrong, but you're admitting your growth, right? And I've had to do the same thing.
I think it's okay for us to admit we were wrong, but it certainly feels a little easier to be like, oh, I'm growing. But I mean, it's just, it's okay to be humble. And I don't think, I certainly don't have it all figured out or have all the answers. I just want to spur conversation and curiosity. But
yeah, totally.
I agree with you 100% when it comes to the obsession that I see now in the world regarding blood glucose.